Welcome to this week's installment of Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale with Don Henniger. I'm Don. With me is my podcast partner and man on the money, Kevin Maxwell.
Hey, Don, how are you?
Good, Kevin. Always good when I get a chance to see you.
Can't wait. Every Wednesday.
Every Wednesday. Look forward to it every single week. And you know why?
Why is that?
Because we always have great guests.
I look forward to this
We've talked about this. 87 guests, all been great, never been a repeat, and we're rocking and rolling strong, right? Nobody can say that.
We've never had a repeat. We have had, well, this is the first time we're going to have two spouses? No, we had Jim and Sandy on a couple weeks ago.
We did together.
As a together.
But David and Diane are going to be separate.
That's right.
And the David we're talking about is David Smith, who is unbelievably, both Kevin and I have long admired David for his public service to our city and the work that he continues to do in our community. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So just a little background. David is a former city council member who was elected in 2014, served for one term. Before that, he served for 3 years as the city treasurer. So if you want to find someone who knows how to dig into the financial health of a city, David's your guy. Before he moved to Scottsdale in 1986, he was CFO for the Tennessee Valley Authority, the nation's largest electric utility, and he also was the CFO for Amtrak, two major organizations there, to say the least. CFO for both of them. Come on, my gosh. 86, David and his wife Diana bought the Scottsdale Airport News, I'm always fascinated to talk to them about newspaper stuff. We owned it for 10 years, and it's still going strong today. So, David, let's talk a little bit about when you moved to Scottsdale in 86. What kind of brought you here, and tell us a little bit about what your life was like before then.
Well, what brought us here more than anything else was the snow, because we were in Pittsburgh, and Diana decided that not everybody in the world was spending their free time changing their tires twice a year from studs to non-studs. So here we were, and the agreement was we'd move here, and I could work wherever I wanted. So for many years, I was commuting out of town literally every week, first to Dallas, and then further east to Tennessee, and then further east to Washington, D.C., and found that the commute became difficult. And so we had a place in Washington, a place here, but that's why we're here, for the sunshine, as are so many other people.
So I beat you here from Pittsburgh by about 4 years. I grew up in Pittsburgh and moved here in 82.
Oh, is that right?
So I did not know that you were from Pittsburgh. I thought I knew everything about you, and here we go, every week.
And Diane told us a similar story, but I don't remember the Pittsburgh part.
Oh, I would have remembered that,
obviously.
I know you
would have.
Yeah. So what led you to the role as city treasurer? How did that happen?
Well, it was 2008. I'd retired from work, I thought. But we were having a recession, you remember, in 2008, and the city was trying to figure out how to cope with that. Mayor Lane had made some decisions, and he decided, among other things, to create a budget review commission to look at additional ways to save money. And so I was appointed to that commission, and one of our recommendations was that the city should have an independent financial person, not a person that reported to the city manager, who at the time, by the way, was a landscape engineer. So a lot was lost in the transition of messaging. And the council thought that was a grand idea, looked for volunteers to do that. I was pointing to a loose ceiling tile at the time, and
Don't put your hand up. Did you ever do that in an auction? You put your hand up, oh my God, what did I just buy?
Yeah.
And you bought the treasurer's roll.
I think that's what it was. Although I was actually on the payroll of a paid city employee in that position, and the purpose was to craft and put together an independent financial function, independent charter officer reporting directly to council, not to the city manager, and to see if we could make that happen. And so that's why the tenure was short, and but the mission was, I think, accomplished, and it remains independent today.
So you were the first person to take the role of treasurer as it was a charter officer job. So you paved the way. Was there any learning or any hiccups along the way, or things that you learned as you sort of paved a new road there, if you will?
Well, it was a new environment, a new learning environment for council as well as the city manager and the rest of the staff. But it's a valuable perspective for the council to have, because the city manager may come with a proposal, let's do X, and somebody needs to say, we can do X, I need to alert you that it will cost this much money. May still be what you want to do, but be aware of what the costs and implications are. And in business, that's a useful counterpoint for people to consider. It's equally valuable in the city.
It's a good point. Checks and balances, I guess, right?
Yes.
So in 2008, you're saying that as recently as 2008, which is only 15 years ago, right? The person that we had in charge of the city treasurer office before it got there was somebody who was not a professional accounting person, didn't have an accounting background?
Well, no, I've said the reporting lines were for that person to report to the city manager, and the city manager did not have an accounting or financial background.
See. Okay.
No, the fellow who was there filling the seat, if you will, before I was, was fully qualified as a financial person. He had not operated in that environment of independence, and ultimately was not selected by the city council to make this transition occur.
I'm kind of curious about what the financial responsibilities, job, and so forth. The specifics are different compared to working for private business for big companies like Amtrak or the Tennessee Valley Authority than it is working for a city government like Scottsdale. What are some of the differences?
Well, city government is unique in many respects. Number one, they don't have a marketing department. I mean, there is no initiative to enhance income or create new sales opportunities or that sort of thing. It's very much a service industry, and of course, open meeting laws and the requirements of governmental accounting. Those are all somewhat unique to government, but they're nuances that are not necessarily important to the public. They just happen to be important to running the business.
A bit of a learning curve then as you transitioned into that role, learning some of those things.
Well, I intended to transition out of there earlier, but it was right in the middle of the election cycle, and I think the mayor and others said, well, you can't leave now. We're having an election. So. And my thought was, well, do I care? But I did stay around a while longer, and then finally there were a couple of things that I wanted to do while I was there, and I was successful in doing it. We were doing a lot of refinancing because that period of time was a period of very low interest rates, as you may remember. And so we were able to buy a lot of the preserved land at very favorable interest rates, refinance a lot of the existing debt, at favorable interest rates. We were nurturing through, at that time also, the increase in the bed tax that now funds so much of the tourism initiatives in the city, and defining how that will work. So there were important initiatives, but finally I decided it's time to move on. So I took a year off, but in that period of time I was there at the city, I was obviously watching the city council function, and I think I decided, I could do that. You could do that. And so I ran for city council about a year after I left the city, and that accounts for my one term there on city council.
The political bug got you. It's gotten other people around these microphones too. I'm looking at one over there at Kevin. Yeah. Sometimes the political bug bites and you got to answer, right?
Well, you think you can make a difference, right?
Well, the hope is that you can. That's quite different than being in industry. In an industry, you have your opinion, you share it with others, you sit around the table, you make a decision, whatever. It is very difficult for city councils in this environment of open meeting laws, and you can't talk to one another. You literally cannot sit around the table and arrive at a consensus with your 6 colleagues, and that's an operating difficulty.
Not to mention the polarization that divides us and leads us to some pretty unworkable conditions sometimes, right?
There was then, and I think probably is even more now, polarization. Not just at our level, but in the entire political spectrum. It's
up and down the level, exactly. We've talked a lot about that, Kevin and I, before.
Ostensibly, as you know, city council is not supposed to be political. It's not party affiliated, but people have a way of introducing politics or divisive issues that tend to magnify the differences. And the problem is, as you fight over some of these issues, which in the whole scheme of things are fairly inconsequential. I think you had an article recently about the number of people losing sleep over road diets.
Right.
But the problem is, as you focus on these issues, which seem large in some people's minds, it diverts you from the visioning process, what's our next big, bold idea? Where do we take the city from here?
Mm-hmm.
20 years from now, the city will not be remembered for its position on road dieting up or down. And so we run the risk of losing some of our competitive edges as a city, as a destination, if we don't continually focus on the big issues.
We couldn't agree more. We talk a lot about vision here and the lack of vision we have amongst some of our leaders. How do we bring that back to council? How does that happen?
Oh, that's a difficult question, Don. I mean, I think it has to be a grassroots initiative from the citizens finally saying, we're seeing a deterioration here, we're seeing it there, whatever. We need to refocus. Many years ago, when we first moved to Scottsdale, there was a process, really, a visioning process that brought a lot of interested and influential citizens together. And from that, I'll talk about one area, for example, in particular, that's important to both Diana and I and many other citizens, and that is our deteriorating position in what I call the arts and culture. Scottsdale used to have a dignified and significant position in arts and culture, and we find ourselves today scrapping for pennies to maintain our position. We're holding performances in a city-owned theater that was built when the city was 80,000 in population. We're now 250,000 and many times the geographic size. And that's just one example, but this community recognition for arts and culture, whether it's the artists on Main Street doing their thing or the city-promoted events, this doesn't just happen by accident. You have to nurture that sort of thing in a community and make it not only part of your identity, but you have to fund it.
So when was the last time you mentioned some of the previous visioning sessions that we have, and I can think back to when the chamber did a couple of things, and the Morrison report was part of that, Which Way Scottsdale. That was about 15 years ago now, something like that. Have we had anything like that since then?
I don't think so.
I don't think we have either. Maybe this could
You can have council retreats now. But first of all, it's just council. It's not the public. It's not a public-appointed body. But more importantly, it's to focus on discrete issues like, the next year's transportation budget or something like that. So
I think that the general plan probably was the last time we had a similar discussion, right?
Yeah.
Which was a couple of years ago, but.
Yeah. But my eyes always glaze over when we talk about the general plan. I know it's an important document and it's a long-term sort of guidance, but it's not a dream. It's not a vision. It's not about what do we want this city to be in the next 10 years. That's a dream. Let's not set up rules for zoning. What do we want to dream for the future of the city?
In fairness, I would say we do have a document that was generated, I guess, last year, finally came off the press, the whatever they call it, the tourism plan, the dream plan for Scottsdale, whatever.
Yeah.
It has several initiatives in there, but there are a lot of folks that are concerned that those are platitudes rather than action items. Yeah, it has to be a grassroots kind of thing involving the citizens. And
I'll give the city a little credit because they did reach out to citizens and try to get their involvement in it, but it was like it wasn't a dream document. It was a guidance document, and it certainly wasn't something I'd get excited about. Today, I'm going to go spend a half a day visioning what I want our zoning laws to be to guide growth in North Scottsdale. No, I want to know what can this city be in 10 years?
And you do also, I mentioned briefly in passing the money aspect of it, but it does have to be funded, and it's more than just word of mouth. It has to be dollars and cents behind the initiative, and that is that's becoming increasingly difficult in Scottsdale because it's as you know, we have the lowest sales tax rate of any city in the entire state. Yep. And if you pause and think about that, it's it's a bragging point for some people. In my opinion, it's not anything to be proud of. It's equivalent to saying we have the lowest funding for public education, except for Mississippi.
Yeah, right.
We need to have a funding, not just so we have more money to spend on whatever, but specifically money targeted to the future of Scottsdale.
David, one of the things I want to talk to you about is while you were on council, you mentioned this a couple times and had a couple runs at it, trying to disengage the food tax in Scottsdale. Why was that important to you? I think it's because of regressive tax. I think you probably don't believe in or are not in favor of regressive tax rates. But talk about your passion for trying to eliminate the food tax in Scottsdale.
Well, it is a passion. It's it's not going to move the city forward necessarily. It doesn't have anything to do with visioning. It's just a discrete item that I think is, frankly, an embarrassment for the city. I think it is an embarrassment for the city of our size and our wealth and our culture, our affluence, whatever, that we rely on the most regressive tax in the world, the one that most punitively impacts the neediest citizens of our community. And we don't have to do that.
How is this a small revenue stream for the city?
I beg your pardon?
Is it a small revenue stream for the city? I mean, eliminating that, what would it do to the city budget? Would it have an impact at all? I mean,
it would probably cost $12 million or something like that.
Is that right?
Well, but understand, it's by imposing the 1.75% tax on food. So where does the 1.75% tax go? Well, 0.35 of it goes to the preserve. The preserve does not need food tax. The preserve has a huge surplus. All the land that we were going to buy, we've bought. So it's going into a bucket there, which is not needed. Another 0.1 of it is going towards something called the Arterial Life Cycle Projects. It's a discrete fund that creates money to match MAG, Maricopa County government, money for roads. They don't need a food tax. And so only 1% of it goes into the general fund. And when I was on the council, I told them, I said, if we can't eliminate it, let's at least divert it away from the general fund into some place that makes more sense. Mm-hmm. We needed capital money at the time, so I said, let's move it into the capital program. Let's wean ourselves off of this resource. And we did for a while. And then I was off the council, and that action was reversed, and it's now back as a resource in the general fund. Understand that the general fund revenues from sales tax over the past 10 years have doubled.
In the last 10 years?
Past 10 years have doubled. And that's another statement you have to stop and ponder. And because everybody says, politicians say, I have not raised your taxes. What they really mean is they have not raised the tax rate.
Right.
They have been willing participants in watching the tax revenues go up and up and up. And in fact, as I said, doubled in past 10 years.
Won't they say that's because of increased population and growth in the city and things like that?
Inflation, economic growth, all of the above, yes.
That's right. Higher tax, higher home values, obviously, contribute to that.
But for the average citizen, their taxes have gone up. They've gone up, if nothing else, because of inflation. And it's particularly onerous if you see it going up because food prices are going up, because eggs cost more. The poorest and neediest families in our city don't have an alternative to eating 3 times a day. Everybody does that. But for them, it's a significant portion of their disposable income. And it's aggravated then when you say, I'm going to tax that portion of your disposable income and make it even more aggravating. You ask, why was I on this bandwagon? It's first of all, as I said, I think it's an embarrassment. We're virtually the only city of any size in the state that still continues to tax food. But it's an embarrassment, too, because we have multiple ways we could get around that. I mean, just stop spending so much money.
Right.
You know what occurs to me also, Kevin, as you bring this topic up, which is a great topic, we worry about affordable housing
Yeah.
People can't afford to stay in their homes and certainly can't afford to move to Scottsdale. All these little extra things that we pop onto, like a food tax, just keeps eroding away at a family budget. So if we could do anything, what a relief that would be, just a little bit even for families who are trying to just struggle to live here.
Well, not only that, if you're a politician, you say you're in favor of creating some affordable housing, which is a monumental problem and a very, very difficult thing to do, obviously, because everybody talks about it, but it's very difficult to solve the problem. Start there. Start with the food tax, right? That could be a way to do it. David, what would it take to eliminate that? Would that be a city council measure? Would have to go to the voters?
Just takes 4 members of the city council.
Is that right?
That's it.
So is there any appetite for that?
Could be done in a single council meeting by 4 people voting in favor.
How close did you get to getting that taken off?
Well, as I said,
you got a little modification to it.
Off, and we were going to wean ourselves away from it. And then when the CIP got new money with a bond issue, we would take it from the CIP and basically eliminate the tax. But that's I didn't stay around long enough to do that.
Yeah,
and no one else had the enthusiasm for it.
Do you think there's any enthusiasm on the council now to even take that subject up and discuss the options with that? I haven't seen it on the council agenda, I don't think.
I don't know. I don't think there are 4 votes for it because it's just, some people say, well, you have to replace the tax. No, you don't have to replace the tax. You just have to stop spending that money every year.
Good point.
Because the tax will keep going up. The tax revenues will keep going up. People don't understand sometimes the budgeting process at the city, at any city, is fundamentally you start and figure out, what do I think the revenues are going to be next year? From sales tax, property taxes, developers, all sorts. What do I think the total revenues are going to be? And then in order to meet the legal requirement of a balanced budget, you dump in expenses equal to that amount.
Right.
And if it's a whole bunch of extra money, then you come up with new programs, and you come up with raises for people, and you come up with hiring programs and whatever. And of course, if you're short, then you peel back. But that's the nature of a balanced budget. It's not anything to celebrate. It's a legal requirement. And it just says you'll spend every dime that comes in. And that's a balanced budget.
And not a dime more. Like the feds,
and
right?
Not
just
a dime
just
more.
Raise the ceiling a little bit more, right? Keep on spending,
exactly.
right? Which is what the feds do.
Exactly.
Hearing about how much of the food tax actually goes to road work gives me a whole new way of thinking about the term road diet.
I was thinking the same thing. Oh, Don, you're too good. Hey, one thing I always appreciated about David being on council was to him talking about budgets and taxes and revenue streams and things like that. It's like talking to an old economics professor, just really knowledgeable, and I miss that perspective. But so let me take advantage of this because we're going to run out of time very quickly unless I get to it right away. And that is okay. Talk. I mean, I'm sure you've been monitoring the new budget. It was introduced, I think, last week. They'll be talking about it during the month of May and voting on it in June, I believe, or July. I saw that, yeah.
Before June.
Okay. All right. What's your thoughts on the new city budget?
Well, one of them I alluded to. It's a budget that it has a small amount of increase. They call that a conservative increase in revenues. But it has, they're spending, again, every dime that comes in one way or the other. And there are some aspects of the budget that I hope the council focuses on. The personnel costs in the general fund, and this is on one of the screens that they showed the other night, are going up 15.5%. Now, that's not what you do in an environment where you think we're going into a recession, which was the preamble they had at the beginning of the discussion. It's you asked before some of the differences between private industry and government, but one of the differences is in private industry, they always boast about increased productivity, and we can now make a car with only 120 man hours rather than 220 man hours or whatever. I'm making those numbers up, but that's the nature of productivity that is a boastful item, rightfully so, in private industry. They don't talk about increases in productivity in government. They just talk about we need 50 more people next year for a variety of things, and next year we'll need another 50 and whatever, and it creeps up. But it particularly creeps up when you have your largest cost element, which is personnel cost, and you want to increase it by 15.5%. I mean, that's just, I hope somebody on the council challenges that.
Right. Well, I know this looks like I know the Scottsdale Progress said the highlights include a $44 million increase in the city's general fund, an eyebrow-raising 13% jump from the $331 million in this year's budget to $375 million next year. That's a significant amount of money.
And are they talking about revenues? I haven't read that article. Are they talking about revenues or expenses?
They're talking about increasing the general fund. Yeah.
Well, and probably there are a number of things that increase the revenues into the general fund. The sales tax, of course, is one, and developer fees and property tax. Property taxes are not a big factor, by the way. A lot of people think they are, but they're really not for the city. They're an important factor for the schools, but that's where most of your property tax dollars go. So I don't know what they were referring to, what line item, but it would be an eye-dropping or eyebrow-raising number, yes.
Yeah. Well, part of the problem is when the bulk of your budget, this is true in private industry too, is people. It's also the hardest place to cut if you got to cut back all of a sudden, and if you've got to manage expenses to meet revenue later on, which you have to do with a city budget, and your biggest element is personnel costs. What are you going to do? Lay off people that you've brought on recently? I mean, it leaves you little flexibility.
Well, one of the things, going back to the period when I joined the city, we were looking for ways to cut cost. One of the things that was done, I wasn't leading that initiative. It was Mayor Lane and the folks at the time, but they decided to basically eliminate an entire level of management. We used to have a number of assistant city managers, and they eliminated them all. And for many years, the city manager just reported to the next level of management reported to him. And eventually, you have a city manager. I think even for next year, the proposal is to have another I'm saying assistant city manager, and then another one, and then another one. And pretty soon we'll rebuild to the level of manpower that we had in 2008. And this was presented in the budget as, an achievement in a sense that we're only now getting back to the levels of staffing that we had in 2008. From my point of view, I don't consider that a goal to aspire to. I would be much more impressed if they could tell me, we've managed to figure out how to deliver the same level of goods and services at a lower cost. And you're right, Don. The cost is predominantly people cost because it's a service organization.
I'm looking at all these different line items from the current city budget, and a lot of them have to do with salaries and compensation for city employees. $6.5 million for citywide pay for and performance program, which through employees can receive up to 5% yearly salary increases based on performance. We have a 2% market adjustment for employee salary increasing to $5.7 million. So that's just an adjustment to keep up with inflation and to keep up with the competitiveness of maybe other cities. You think that's probably what that is, huh?
Well, ostensibly that's what it would be for, yes. Okay. I don't know that we are uncompetitive with other cities. I haven't looked at I don't think council has been given reports of competitiveness versus other cities. It can't be to keep up with inflation necessarily, because it's the target for inflation is, as you know, the target is 2 to 3% nationwide. We're currently above that level, but that's an aberration that they're trying to fix at the national level through rate hikes and whatever. So it's the 5%. I don't know how to describe what a person does to meritoriously and earn a 5%, but I know most of them do.
A lot of the city employees still can't afford to live here either, right. So that's to talk about a competitive disadvantage. Our cost of housing becomes one of that for bringing city employees and anybody else in terms of the employee workforce into the city.
Yeah, it's true.
Well, it's true also, but I mean, don't lose sight of the fact that probably 80% of our employees do not live in Scottsdale.
Right, exactly.
And that also has its downside. When your city is run by people who do not live in the city and do not travel these roads, and do not enjoy the
Have
amenities of the
neighbors.
city.
Right, have neighbors who are city residents, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So I wish there's some way that everybody who worked for the city lived here and lived with the consequences, as all of us do here in the room.
Point of pride too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Speaking of money, let's talk about another subject too while we still have time, and that's the discrepancy between in our bond program about how much money we raised and how much more now our bond projects are going to cost, given inflation and supply chain business and all that. What do you think council ought to do with that? Find a way to keep funding all of those projects that the voters approved a couple of years ago, cut back a little bit because we've lost sight of the expenses that have gone with them. That's a bit of a dilemma that council is going to have to face.
Well, it's going to be a tough choice. I mean, the only way to fund all those programs, given the increase over the bond authorized amount, is to find money in the general fund and the general fund CIP to put into those programs. Some can be funded that way, but there will be a shortfall, and probably some of the projects will not be able to be done. And that that's a difficult thing for council to wrestle with, because people will say, I voted for this project. The only reason I voted for this was to get this particular item.
So what happened to those funds? Have already been allocated, or
in the bond program? You mean?
I guess they don't get built. They don't get taxed. Is that right? Or
well, in the bond, you had, I think, three broad questions.
Mm-hmm.
Public safety and parks and whatever the other was,
right.
And then discrete projects within those, and an estimate of what the cost would be for those. And so, if you don't have enough money for it and you can't fund it with the general fund, I suppose you just strike it out.
So bonds would have been issued to build those projects, and if they're not being built, then the bonds will not be issued then. Is that right?
I'll have to have you ask that again.
Sure. So if the project would have been built, city bonds would have been issued to pay for those. And then if they're not being built, then they just don't issue the bonds, so there's no cost to the
we do have, historically, we've had projects that have gone out to the bondholders to build XYZ, and it turns out XYZ was not anything that was feasible to do. And so that authorization expires. I mean, it just sits there. It's not, no debt is issued for it. It's not built. That doesn't often happen, but it has in the past.
We got a political situation coming up too. Now it's become more financial. Now it's become a political hot potato, if you will, in council, and it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out over the next couple of weeks. I'd like to get into at least one more topic while we have you here, and that's just how do you balance? So this is the growth and development question that comes up all the time in terms of Scottsdale's future. But from your view, how do you balance the preservation of Scottsdale's unique character and history with the need for growth and development? What are your solutions for that?
Well, there is and can be a middle line, or a middle road, if you will, insisting on quality development that is consistent with our character, with our heritage, whatever. When I used to talk to people, I would tell them that the Optima on Scottsdale Road was an extraordinary project, and it really added to the cachet of the city, and it added to our character. And when people drive past it as tourists out of town, whatever, they will perhaps invariably look to their left and say, my goodness, look at that. Isn't that unique? That kind of development we should promote and encourage. But so often what we get are just a box.
Yeah.
And it's not only uninteresting, it's a distraction. And more importantly, these are boxes that can be seen in any city. So we need to consciously be aware of what we're doing to the cachet and to the character of the city with our development. Development will inevitably happen. It has to happen. I mean, things wear out and have to be renewed and renovated. But with proper leadership and guidance, we can do that in a way that adds to the character of the city and to the cachet of coming to Scottsdale.
I think we've argued, Kevin, for that for forever.
Right.
The idea being, though, don't just say no to anything that has growth and density. Say yes if it meets the high standards that we've gotten used to and rely on in Scottsdale. I think that's what I'm hearing you say too, David, right?
Yeah. There's been some examples of that, but
Yeah, and there are, and we're going to need more. We have another Optima project going up on up in North Scottsdale. Which once that comes off, and they start getting into the ground on that, and the Caesars Republic Hotel is going up, although that might not have been approved with the previous council. Who knows? Or this current council, I mean. So there's hope out there that the development will continue. So I guess that's a good sign.
There are quite a few projects in the pipeline that, and it was true when I was on the council. It's still true for this council that even if they stopped proving anything, there's still a great number of projects that are in the approved stage and will come out of the ground. Hopefully they will have character and curious appeal, but I can't say necessarily that I think they will, but we'll see.
Stay tuned for that, right?
Yeah.
Stay tuned for that.
Yeah.
David, you were out of office before COVID happened, but the city budget was squeezed a little bit during COVID. How do you think that the council handled those couple of years when revenue streams were kind of pinched a little bit? Do you think they did a good job, or?
Well, I think they were greatly assisted, as were many other communities, by federal grants.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think anybody was laid off. In fact, at the end of it, I think many of them received bonuses for having held in there during the virus. So how do they handle it? I don't know. They spent the money that they were given very well, and it was a godsend for many communities to avoid severe reductions of services.
Okay. Shift to current times then. Do you think this budget, this city council and leadership, are they doing a good job, you think, fiscally? Or do you think there's things that you would do different if you were still on council now?
Well, it's the budget is a difficult thing in the sense that we're now a community that is so large and the budget is so big and so multifaceted that it's very difficult for anybody to get their arms around the entire budget. They can see the parts that are discretely important to them and make sure that they're protected and taken care of. But it's very difficult for anybody to see the totality of the budget, except as it's presented to them in the public meetings. And there's really not a chance for them to say in those public meetings, I like line 3, but line 4 I don't like, or whatever. So it's I don't know what the solution to that is. The solution is not to hire a bunch of accountants to serve on council, but because we really need people, as I said, coming up with a vision for the city.
Speaking of needing people to come up with a vision, what is your advice for people who are interested in pursuing a career in public service and maybe running for city council, which we need more good bodies to stand up, men and women to step forward? What's your advice, and how can we encourage people to do that?
Well, first of all, don't be intimidated to do it. I mean, if I can do it, anybody can do it. And I think a lot of people feel that way. They feel like, if I can do it, surely anybody can do it. So the most important thing is to make sure you have spent a bit of time immersing yourself in the city and how it works and what the levers are to pull one way or the other. I had the advantage, obviously, of being integral into the city in the finance function for a couple or 3 years before I embarked on this. And for many people, if you come in, you'll have a particular initiative that you feel very, strongly about, whatever it may be. But that's only one of 1,000 things that are going to make the city run. And to understand those 1,000 things, you really need to spend time doing your homework. It's not just a public relations job. Mm-mm. Because once you're there and on screen and voting one way or the other, it doesn't matter whether you smile or dress well. It's whether you understand the issues and can intelligently guide the future of the city.
Well, we need more people like that, that's for sure. Kevin, any other questions for David? It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thank you so much for David and Diana.
Yeah, exactly.
Two people who represent our city very, very well. They're obviously very ingrained in the arts. It's part of our city and are big advocates for that, which I totally appreciate. We need more of that. But also, I love David's perspective. He does he carries himself in such a dignified manner. I wish we had more people like that around now.
Couldn't agree more, especially given the current political climate. We just need people who have respect for each other, can agree to disagree, and still remain friends afterwards. And that's we need more of that. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Kevin, you have an analytics this week?
I did a little one, John. I was kind of fun. You can go back and speak of the city budget. You can go on the website and look at all the city budgets that have ever been out there. And I had some fun kind of digging into that today.
Right.
I looked at, just briefly, the 1959 to 1960 city budget.
Pennies.
Yeah, guess how much you think what do you think it was? Take a guess?
God, I'm going to say $500,000.
$70,000.
Let's go get out.
The whole year, the whole fiscal budget for the year in 1959 was $70,000.
That wouldn't pay for my lunch.
No, it wouldn't.
And they probably fought over that as much as they're fighting over this one today. Yes.
Probably. What I thought was interesting was, we coming up with this road diet thing where we have some. They talked about the Thomas Road Improvement District, right? They're giving some money to do some stuff to Thomas Road. Back in 1963, they also gave some money to the Thomas Road Improvement District, which I didn't know even existed. It was only $24,000. But I thought that was interesting that here we are again, circling back again, which I've probably done several times in between then, 1963 and now.
Probably have.
But the Thomas Road
that back in that time may have been to turn it from a dirt road into a paved road.
That's a good point, David. That was for asphalt right there, $24,000. And then, and I was looking at this thing in earlier. I was quoting the Scottsdale Progress when it talked about an eyebrow-raising 13% jump in the budget. Here in 1978, it was a 16% jump, which is from one of the previous years. So also very, very big, right?
Right.
And then one thing I want to read to you here is I just lost my place. Here it is right here. I was reading this because we've had lots of conversation about water, right? In the past. And there was a little footnote in this 1978 budget that talks about water conservation. And I'm just going to read something to you, and I want you to think about who our leadership back there. We had Sam Campana was on city council then. Mayor Bill Jenkins.
Bill Jenkins
was the mayor, and then Mayor Drinkwater was a council member then. But anyway, here's what it says: the 1980 Groundwater Management Act mandates significant changes to the water production activity for the city. Historically, the city provided additional water for its population growth by drilling additional wells and pumping groundwater into the city water system. The act mandates that the city achieve a safe yield by 2025.
Have we?
That's in 2 years.
That's 2 years.
And it goes
So
on
we
to
still got 2 years to do that.
We might start digging some more wells.
I guess. It says that a safe yield means that there are no more groundwater may be withdrawn from the underground water supply than is naturally or artificially recharged or restored. The water needs of today population can be provided from groundwater. And it goes on to talk about SRP and things like that. But look at that, man. The reason that we have a good water preservation system now is because of the work they were doing back then.
I may be wrong about this. I don't have the stats in front of me, but we pump a lot of water back into the ground.
We do.
Because of the excess water that we're not using. And so, if anything, we're making more deposits than withdrawals in our groundwater, right?
Right, yes. And we have the water. Cool. Yeah, right. So, we're in a good shape. Fine. There's still concerns because we're in a drought. But in the past, Scottsdale's done a great job of water management. And here's a little footnote I found from 1978. It talks about that.
It's interesting. Even today, I had one person come up to me this morning and say, is Scottsdale running out of water? Well, not any more than the rest of the Southwest.
Right.
The Southwest has a water concern, but Scottsdale's actually doing really well managing its water supply. People don't realize that because of all the hoopla over the Rio Verde stuff and whatever. No, we're not running out of water any more than anybody else in the West.
Nope.
I think if you look at some of those old reports and some of the things that were done in the past, and water is an example. We have an extraordinary water system, water treatment plants, water rejuvenation, as you said, pumping it back down into the reservoirs, and using recycled water to water all of the golf courses in the city. So there's several innovative things there, but you look at that, you look at the drainage systems that we have with the Indian bin wash and things like that. These are some of the visionary things that were done in the past that we enjoy today.
Right.
And I don't know what I don't know what folks will look to 20 years from now, but we need to have serious conversations about that. What will people look to 20 years from now as being the extraordinary things that were done?
That is a wonderful way to close this session, because it's a call to action in terms of what I'm looking at Kevin saying. We maybe can plant a seed for that.
Right.
We talked about that before, but I would love to promote and figure out maybe a public way to start talking about, let's not with city council members, but with regular city residents. Let's talk about a vision for the city. Maybe that's a goal, Kevin, you and I can do going forward. Great idea, David. And David, thank you so much for not only being with us today, but for your service to the city, for your continued support, for all of the good things that are happening in our community, and for the fact that you and your wife, Diana, just do an amazing job. You're certainly one of Scottsdale's power couples, and we sure thank you for that.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share my opinion. I have opinions on everything, as you know, so
Okay,
it's
good.
more than happy to share them.
And you're probably one of the few people I can talk to about budgets and not fall asleep. So I sure appreciate that as well. So anyway, and thanks to all of you for listening today. And you know what? Share your podcast, share our podcast with your friends, and shed a light on the positive people we bring to this podcast every week. See you next time for Today and Tomorrow in Scottsdale.